great reminder of the mercy available to us this morning. If you would, as I'm getting my stuff together, you can be getting ready as well. 1 Samuel 16 is where we're going to be here in just a little bit. 1 Samuel chapter 16, as we continue our series of Real Truth for a Real World. If you want to be turning over there, that'd be wonderful. So I thank y'all for spreading out this morning. That's great. I'm glad to see you. That way I make sure I have wide range of motion. I appreciate that. But 1 Samuel chapter 16, thank you for braving the monsoon to come and be at Grand Avenue Baptist Church this morning. This past summer, I think most of you probably know, if you weren't here during this time, you don't. Both sets of our students, our kids and our students, got to go out to Spring Lake Camp for church camp. It's a great place. It's a great place to go learn about Christ. Our kids went, and then later in the summer, our students went with FCA camp. And I got the chance one night to go out to FCA camp and see all the great things that they were doing and see the way God was moving. And while I was out there, I also got to reminisce a little bit. I don't know if y'all know this or not, but I got to go to Spring Lake growing up. But it was a little different back then. Like, they got air conditioners now. It just does not feel right. I know we had box fans, and so I felt like we were cheating a little bit. I mean, you only wake up in a half of a pool of sweat in the mornings. And so as I was out there, as I looked at all the different things that had changed about Spring Lake Camp, there was one thing that hadn't changed. There's still what it gets its name for, the Spring Lake, the pond that is in the middle of the camp that people fish in and ride paddle boats in and all those things. And it reminded me of whenever I was working with the church, my home church, the church I grew up in, we would take youth out there sometimes. We'd take students out there that just have a play day, have a fun day. Well, there was one time, and I was younger, on the younger end of the leaders. I mean, I was like 18 or 19, so I can't be blamed for this. It was definitely the older leaders' fault. But anyway, I was waiting on them to do something. But one of the students decided they were going to jump in the lake. It was like late September, early October. It wasn't real cold yet. And so as I was watching him run off the end of the dock, I was thinking, well, if I say stop, he's not going to stop anyway. Plus, I kind of want to see what's going to happen. Right? I mean, what's going to happen? Is it going to be a cannonball? How far is he going to get? Well, this guy, he doesn't run and jump. He runs and dives off the end of the dock into this pond. And so I'm watching what's going to happen. He dives straight into it, and then he comes up, and he's not wet. He's covered in mud. Like head to toe, front and back, just as muddy as you've ever seen anybody be in your whole entire life. I mean, I still remember that. It's a vivid picture of mine. I said I was 18 or 19, and so I don't know how long ago that was, but it was a long time. I don't have a whole lot of images from there stuck, and it is stuck in my mind to this day because this kid was just covered in mud. It was hilarious. At the same time, it was scary because it's like, man, I mean, you were expecting the water to be fairly deep right there, but I mean, it's like this deep probably. He just went right under the mud and came up. And as I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about what happened to him, I thought, how often do we judge whatever it is around us by the surface? How often do we look and we say, well, that looks like a deep body of water. I'm going to go jump in it, when in fact it's only about 2 inches deep. You see, guys, when we come to life, we find very often we can't judge stuff by the way it looks. And very seriously this morning, we can't judge people by what they look like. We can't judge people by their outward appearance. The measure of a person is not their exterior, it's their heart. You see, what this is doesn't matter near as much as what is in here. What's out here does not matter near as much as what is in our hearts. And so when we come to our key passage this morning, 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 7, we see the Lord say exactly this. This may be the most important verse in 1 Samuel. It's one of the most important verses, I think, in the Bible because it captures for us the way that God deals with us and the way that we should deal with people around us. It says, but the Lord said to Samuel, do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord sees not as a man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. Will you pray with me this morning? I need help to preach, and we all need help to hear. And so let's go to the Lord and ask him to help us. Father, I pray, God, that you would be in this time. Lord, I know that you've brought people here to hear your word. God, that they need to hear your word, and that we would be able to. God, I pray that I wouldn't be able to get in the way. God, that other things wouldn't be able to get in the way. And God, that we would really, truly hear from you. God, that this would be a time that you speak to us, that this would be a time that you change us. Lord, that you would show us what it means to look on the heart and not simply look at the outer exterior. Lord, that we would be able to see what it is you have called us to and not simply what we want to do. God, that we would have our hearts changed by your amazing grace this morning. God, we love you. God, we want to serve you. Thank you for this chance. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. And so let me give you just a little bit of background, because last week we were in 1 Samuel 7. Now we're in chapter 16. So that's several years. It's like 40 years, maybe 30, 40 years. And it is like 7 chapters of Bible. And so there's a lot to cover in about 5 to 10 minutes, because I don't want to spend the whole time on a flashback, but it's important to know what had happened. Samuel takes over as prophet. He does a really good job. He does an excellent job his whole life. But as he gets near the end of his life, the people of Israel are like, we don't want your sons to rule over us. We want a king. We want, everybody else around us has a king. We want a king. We want to be like everyone else. And Samuel says, no, you don't. You don't want a king. You get a king, it's not going to be good for you. And they're like, yeah, we want a king. No, we're sure we want a king. You know how growing up you'd be like, but Mom, everybody else has it. But Mom, everybody else is playing in the street. And she'd be like, but you're not everybody else. God says, but you're not everybody else. And they say, we don't care. We want a king. So God says, okay, I'll give you a king. And so God gives them a king. His name is Saul. Everybody thinks Saul is going to be the greatest king ever because Saul looks very much like a king. When you look at Saul, you can see his head above everybody else. And when you look at a crowd of people, Saul stands out because he's taller than everybody else. He's prettier than everybody else. He's stronger than everybody else. He looks like a king. And so everybody thinks this has got to be the guy. And so Saul does good for a little bit. Samuel anoints him. He does good for a little bit. He begins to do some battles. He begins to win some battles. But somewhere along the way, Saul forgets his job. You see, the king of Israel really only has one job. His job is to rely on the Lord and make sure everybody understands to glorify God. That's it. He's sort of like a kicker on a football team. A kicker's got one job, right? Don't miss the field goal. You miss the field goal, you haven't done your job. You got one job, dude. Just do that. Saul, somewhere along the lines, forgets his job. And he forgets his one job is to rely on God. And Saul begins to rely on Saul. Saul begins to not point people to God. Saul begins to point people to Saul. Saul begins to be about himself. He begins to be his own hero. Rather than God being the hero, Saul is the hero. Remember last week in 1 Samuel 7, we saw where Samuel set up the Ebenezer. He set up the stone of help, and he said, up to this point, the Lord has helped us. The Lord is our hero. He set up a monument to remember God's grace and his faithfulness and his power. Saul wins a battle, and instead of setting up a monument to God, Saul sets up a monument to Saul. He sets up a statue of himself, and he says, I want everyone to remember me. I want everyone to remember how powerful I am and how great I am. That's not a real good idea, is it? If you read the Bible, does it ever work out good for people who make statues of themselves? Never. Apparently, he doesn't know history very well. And so Saul sets up a monument for himself. He sets up a stone to remind everyone of his greatness. And God says to Samuel, he says, listen, you need to go get your boy Saul. I'm done with him. He's not going to be king before me anymore. I'm going to get a king after my own heart. I want you to go fire him. He's done. He's fired. He's off the island, whatever. I'm done with him. And so Samuel goes and he says, listen, Saul, I want to tell you, God's done with you. You're not going to be king anymore. God is going to replace you with a better king. He's going to replace you with a king after his own heart. And Saul's response is, well, okay, I don't like that, but will you at least come and honor me before the people? Will you at least come and make sure that everyone still thinks I have your respect? Because I don't want them to leave me. I don't want to lose my kingdom. It's basically Saul's response. And so Samuel says whatever, and then he leaves, and it says that he never seen him again before he died. And so Samuel begins to grieve over Saul. And then we come to verse 1 of chapter 16, and Samuel is still mourning over Saul. He is still upset over Saul. He's crying. It says in verse 1 of chapter 16, the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you grieve over Saul? Samuel's apparently sitting, binge watching Netflix, eating buckets of Bluebell, something. He's not doing anything. He's sitting around in his pajamas. He's just upset. And God comes to him and says, Samuel, why are you still grieving over Saul? I've rejected him from being king over Israel. fill your horn with oil, and go see a guy named Jesse. Jesse's son, one of Jesse's sons, is going to be the king. I've provided myself a king among his sons. And so Samuel gets up and he goes to Jesse's house. He goes to Bethlehem, a little town of Bethlehem, right? But before he goes, he says, God, if Saul hears what's going to happen, if he hears that I'm going to Bethlehem, he's going to kill me. And so God says, go and take a heifer and make a sacrifice while you're there. And so he basically goes incognito, because if Saul, the crazy guy who's sitting on the throne, hears that there's another king in Bethlehem who might take his throne away, if Saul hears that, he's going to go try and kill that king. He's going to try and kill Samuel, the kingmaker. That sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? Sounds sort of like the first couple of chapters of Matthew with King Herod. And so Samuel goes, he goes to Bethlehem to make the sacrifice. When he gets there, the people meet him at the gate and they say, Samuel, why are you here? Like, is this for good or is this for bad? It's sort of like if you say you worked at Domino's right down here on Grand Avenue and the CEO of Domino's showed up. You wouldn't be like, oh, great, the CEO is here, the boss over all the company's here, because that usually means you did something wrong. Well, that's what it was happening in Israel. Samuel was the guy who spoke for God, and he wouldn't be coming to Bethlehem unless he had bad news, apparently. And so they're like, is this good news or is this bad news? And Samuel says, it's all good. I've come to make an offering. In fact, won't you take this heifer and go get it ready? We're going to have an offering. We're going to have a feast. It's going to be great. T-bones for everybody. And so while they're doing that, Jesse begins to bring out his sons. God says to Samuel, Jesse, one of your sons is going to be king. And so if we come to verse 6, it says, when they came, he looked on Eliab and thought, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. And so the oldest comes out. Samuel looks at him. And he says, this is the guy. This is going to be the next king. I mean, look at him. He's got his Letterman jacket. He's tall. He's handsome. People respect him. And you know, it always works out great when you pick a king based on what he looks like. And so he says, this has got to be the king. This has got to be the anointed. And as he is speaking, as he is thinking this in his mind, verse 7 comes, the verse that is our key verse this morning, which is, but the Lord said to Samuel, don't look on his appearance or the height of his stature, because I've rejected him. He says, Samuel, don't you remember, bro? Don't you remember what happens when we pick based on strength? When we picked on external experience? When we pick based on what somebody looks like? It does not work well. We're dealing with Saul as it is. Saul has wrecked the whole nation. He has destroyed everything. So why in the world would you do that again? No, you don't do that. I've rejected him because you look with your own eyes. But then he goes on and he says, for the Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. God is saying, I see something you don't. You see a nice deep pond in which to dive. I see a couple inches deep, under which is nothing but mud. And he basically, what he's saying is, you can't know what's in someone until you see beneath the surface. And there's only one who can see beneath the surface this morning, guys, and it is the Lord. He's the only one who can know what's in our heart. He's the only one who can know what's truly within us. No one else can know that but him and us. He's saying our inner being, in our heart, no one else can know that but him. The part, what does he mean by heart? It's our emotions, it's our center part, it's what makes us go. The heart is the place where our actions come from. It's our motivation. It's what tells us to get up in the morning. It's what causes us to do good or bad. Like, if our heart is good, then we will do good stuff. If our heart is bad, we'll do bad stuff. Our heart directs our steps each day. Whatever our heart is set on will determine our actions based on the situation we're in. And so, like, if our heart is good, we're going to choose good. If our heart is bad, we'll choose bad. It's like when you are squeezed by life, what comes out is what was in. Like, that stuff doesn't just appear. At one point, Jesus is arguing with the Pharisees, and they're like, you don't wash the cups. He's like, of course I don't wash the cups. It's not the cups that matters. What matters is what's on the inside. And his point was, you spend all this time washing cups, and your heart is dirty. He says it's out of the heart that come all these evil thoughts, that come all these evil deeds. It's out of your heart that the mouth speaks. You want to know where the stuff that comes out of your mouth comes from? Sometimes I'm like, I don't know where that came from. And God is like, I do. It came from here. So often we want to sidestep and be like, I don't know, man. It just appeared. No, that comes out of us. And so what God is saying is, what you see before you is a man who commands respect, a man who looks strong, a man who looks able. And what I see before you is a man that is very shallow in his love of me and very deep love of sin. God is saying, Samuel, get over appearances. Something we could all learn from in our culture, right? I mean, how often do we get judged by what we look like? How often do we get judged by what shoes we wear, what socks we wear, what's on our t-shirt, what our appearance is? How often do we judge other people based on what they look like? I mean, we are out of control when it comes to how we value outward appearance in our culture. I mean, we are so obsessed with what people look like. It's like if we don't look like some famous person, if we don't mirror the celebrities and what they wear, if we don't look like them, then somehow we're left out to dry and that we're not cool. But now if we look like cool people, if we look like celebrities, then we're something, right? I call Vin Diesel, by the way. That's what, anyway, let me tell you a little side note. When I was eating lunch with some fifth grade boys one day, they were like, man, you look like Vin Diesel. And I was like, proudest moment in my life, right? I mean, he's a bad looking dude. I'm glad. And they were like, yeah, he ain't got no hair either. And I was like, man, I had a moment, I was cool there for a moment and then it was gone. But so often that's how we value our life. We value our life based on what others see. Our ladies, our women in our culture are constantly abused by the idea that they have to look like imaginary people. I saw this week where this model got called out this magazine because they had photoshopped her pictures. Like, not only do you now have to compete with women and people whose sole purpose in life is to look a certain way, but now you got to compete with imaginary people because they don't even look like that either. But we're obsessed with that. If I don't look like that, then I have no value. Because that's what the culture tells. And God says, quit doing that. Quit looking at what people look like. Quit judging yourself based on what other people see. It goes for men too, right? I mean, we ain't got to look like Thor, thank goodness. But anyway, so now that that's off my chest, we have to be careful not to measure other people based on what we see. We have to be careful not to judge ourselves based on what other people see. You see that this goes for a lot of things, guys. This goes for choosing friends. So often we'll choose friends based on what they look like, based on what they have, based on what other people think of them. When we choose friends, it ought to be based on what's inside. It ought to be based on whether or not they help us draw closer to the Lord. It goes for choosing your spouse. Appearance is not most important. I mean, I got the total package. Crystal is pretty and she has a wonderful heart. And so, I mean, God is good. But anyway, we have to be careful that we don't make appearance the thing. Like, it's a thing, but it's not the thing. It's not what we should judge other people based on. And you can go all the way down the list. But so that we can move on and get out before this evening. We'll move past this point just so we can have some more application. But it says here that the Lord looks on the heart. Verse 8 says, then Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel. And he said, neither has the Lord chosen this one. Then Jesse made Shammah pass by, and he said, neither has the Lord chosen this one. And Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. And Samuel said to Jesse, the Lord has not chosen these. And so you picture each one walking, I don't know why, but I picture a runway and each one walking out and kind of strutting down. You're like, is it me? And God's like, nope. Next. Nope, not him. And all 7 of them come down. You can imagine their sad faces at the end of it. And they're like, none of them are the one that God has called. And so Samuel says, Jesse, don't you have any other sons? God sent me here to anoint a king, and it's not one of these guys. And Jesse's like, oh yeah, we got one. He's a shepherd, though. We don't really, I didn't even think he would be important enough to draw him in from the field. I mean, he's just out taking care of sheep. What in the world do you want to talk to him for? He's the youngest. He's not important. Like, we didn't even call him to dinner. David's about to miss out on a steak, right? I mean, they're about to chow down, and he's not even getting called. He's so unimportant in these people's eyes. And so Samuel says, listen, dude, if he's not here, we're not eating. And so Jesse, of course, is like, go get him, man. Well, I'm hungry. And so they go get him. They bring him in. And immediately, when David enters the room, God says, boom, that's the guy. That's my man. That's going to be my king. David will be the greatest king Israel ever sees. He'd be the greatest king, humanly speaking, that I think this world ever sees. He's a guy who takes a group of people who never had any real power, never had any real serious military success outside of Joshua, who had never really united and become a nation, who were a bunch of loosely affiliated tribes. He's going to take them, put them together, and they are going to absolutely obliterate everybody who comes in their path. He is going to make a nation out of a bunch of tribes, out of a bunch of nomadic people. He's going to take them, and God is going to use David to do things that no one ever thought possible. Against all odds, David is going to succeed over and over and over again. Guys, you have to remember, you have to know, as we see the story of David, as we walk through the story of David over the next couple of weeks, you have to know that God will take anyone who He desires and do things that we never even thought possible. Do not think for a moment this morning that God's amazing power is not able to do amazing things through you. God is so powerful. He's so awesome. He can take you and He can do things you never even thought even that would even matter. God takes the guy who would have gotten least likely to succeed in Who's Who. Do they still do that with the yearbook? Who's Who? Who's most likely to succeed, who's most likely to go to jail, all those different things. Well, David was least likely to succeed. He was so unlikely to succeed that his own dad didn't even take time to call him in from the field. He was so unlikely to succeed. His dad had to be reminded that he had another son. He was so unlikely to succeed that Jesse's like, oh yeah, I guess we should call him in. But it is David who God is going to use to do what God does, which is take the people who we don't expect and turn the world upside down. He's going to look at Eliab and he's going to say, nope, not the guy that you're expecting. Nope, not that guy. He won't do it because I know what's in his heart. Doesn't matter how strong his arm is. What matters is what's in his heart. And so don't think for a moment that you cannot be used by God for great things. Don't underestimate His power. And while we're on topic, guys, as long as we're talking about judging by the heart rather than by what we think of as ability, I think this is a good rebuke for parents. So often we want to decide what's in our children's hearts. We want to decide what they're capable of and what they ought to do. So often we want to say they can do this or they can't do this. So often we want to determine before they ever even get grown who they're going to be. I know I find myself doing this, especially like with Zoe, because sometimes I see, well, both of my kids, when they're acting up, I see myself in them. And I'll say, oh no, we're in trouble. Can't wait till she gets older, because I'm assuming she's going to do what I did. And what I've done is basically put my issues on my kid. But the truth is, I don't know what God's going to do in her heart. I don't know what God is able to do. Why in the world would I handicap my child emotionally and spiritually by saying, well, I did this, so I guess they're going to do it too. We don't know. We don't know what God can do. We don't know we do know His power, but we don't know what He's able to do. And so, of course, we're not going to come and say, well, we're hopeless. We're going to say, God, you can do whatever you want to do. And so God says, not the guy you're thinking of, my guy, David. And so why David? Well, there's a lot of things about David as we walk through the rest of this passage. We find out some things about him. We find out that he was out tending sheep. Verse 13 says that Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. And Samuel rose up and went to Ramah. This is a picture of David having strength to do whatever he's going to face. And we'll see later some of the other things that David's able to do. He can play music really well. He can play the harp really well. He can do all sorts of things. He's really brave, right? We'll see that in David and the story of David and Goliath. But what's the difference between him and Saul? What makes him so special? What makes him God's man when Saul is not? Well, it's his heart. Remember, this is the whole thing. God would say earlier, I'm going to find me a king after my own heart. He says, I've rejected this guy. I'm going to find a better king. And here he says, I don't see what's on the outside. I see his heart. I see what's in his heart. The difference between Saul and David is their heart. There's two applications I want to give you very quickly this morning. The first one is when you are your own desire, destruction is your destiny. We see this in Saul over and over and over again. We see where Saul's point was Saul. He was the point of his life. Over and over again, he makes dumb decisions, and they're always circled around him receiving glory. They're always circled around him getting his own way. He kills priests. He almost kills his own son. He does all kinds of dumb and idiotic things because he's all about himself. He loves himself. And so he's interested in getting glory for himself, not for the Lord. And can I tell you guys that no matter what relationship you have, no matter what situation you find yourself in, if you are the point, you're going to mess it up. All of our relationships that struggle, we can look at them and, we're going to find out, well, the problem is that I'm making it about me. It doesn't matter how nice of a person someone is. Eventually, they're going to get sick of it always being about you. It doesn't matter if it's your spouse. It doesn't matter if it's work. It doesn't matter if it's a friend. Eventually, you're going to be like, you know what? Sooner or later, it'd be nice if you did something for me instead of everything being about you. When we are the point, when we are our own heart's desire, we're going to destroy everything in our life. That's because when you're selfish, that's what you do. Saul is a perfect example of this, especially when it comes to the Lord. Because, guys, there's only room in your heart for one God. Either you or God. Can't have two. Either God is the one who's in control or you're the one who's in control. And God sure is not going to put up with everything being about you. He sure is not going to say, well, you know what? It's all about you. No, it's either all about him or it's not. And Saul never really got this. He never really understood it. On the other hand, David did get it. David does understand. We see this from the very beginning. He's the guy out in the field doing work while everybody else is getting ready for dinner. He doesn't ask to be a part of Samuel's beauty contest. He's not upset that he was left out. We don't see any of that out of David. What we see out of David is a humble man willing to do whatever it takes to serve others. You see, when you chase the Lord humbly, when your heart chases the Lord humbly, your desires, you'll find your desires. Whatever it is that you're desiring, you will find it. That's Psalm 37:4. Guess who wrote that? David did. He said, delight yourself in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. He's a man who teaches us what this means. Over and over and over again, he puts other people before himself. Over and over again, David takes the back seat. Over and over again, David serves others. He puts other people before himself. He says, not about me, about the Lord. Not about me, about the Lord. After Goliath, it doesn't matter what you're talking about. David's always giving glory to God. He never makes a monument to himself. In fact, later in life, he says, you know what? I got a really big house. And God is his place where we worship him is a tent. I don't like that. He needs a big house because everybody needs to know who's in charge. Everybody needs to know that it's all about him and not about me. Because that's his heart. That's who he is. He's constantly saying, how can I serve others? How can I please others? And of course, why wouldn't he? Because David is a picture of one to come who would be the greatest servant. Someone who would be the greatest shepherd. David is a shepherd, but he's not the good shepherd. Jesus would come and he would say, even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And that's the epitome of what it means to have a heart chasing the Lord. A heart that says, I'm willing to serve others in place of myself. I'm willing to give God glory in place of myself. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to please the Lord in all things. Jesus would say also, he would say, seek first the kingdom of heaven and his righteousness, and all these other things will be added to you. The problem is we get it flipped. We want all these other things, and then after that, if we have time, we want the kingdom of heaven and his righteousness. Guys, this morning I want to encourage you as we get ready to close. I want to encourage you to seek the Lord with your heart, to seek the Lord with your passion, to seek out his grace and his strength. You guys can come on if you want for our time of invitation as we get ready for that. But as I looked at this passage this week, I realized that it's maybe one of the most dangerous and scary passages in the Bible. God says, I look at your heart. I see what's inside of you. You see, so often when it comes to what we do, how we act, how we dress, everything we do, we're focused on what other people see. We're focused on whether or not other people think we're good people. We're focused on whether or not we think we're good people based on what we've done. But God says, I see what's on the inside. You can have everybody else fooled, but I know why it is that you did everything you did this past week. And that's a little terrifying. It's a little terrifying to think about the fact that God knows just how selfish we are. It's a little terrifying to think about the fact that God knows how little love we have for him very often. But at the same time, we find his love and his grace in that. Because even as he knows everything about us, he still loves us. The Bible says that even while we were sinners, even while we were rebels against God, Christ died for us. For scarcely will man die for a righteous man, but for an unrighteous man? Are you serious? Yet Christ went to the cross for you and me, knowing every thought you would ever have, knowing everything that you thought this past week. He says, I love you. I love you in spite of all of that. I love you in spite of everything that you've done. And if you will trust on me, if you believe on me, you can have everlasting life. And so, guys, the question this morning is not what you look like. The question this morning is not what the outside looks like. The question is what do you have in here? And more importantly, who? Is Christ in your heart this morning? If you would stand as we sing, as we have this time of invitation, if God is speaking to you, would you come?